Have you ever sat around thinking, gosh, I miss the old days. If only more new days could be like the old days. Maybe a little too far back. Maybe more like 10 years old now. We're talking literally and figuratively. As much as some retro gamers can be irritated by things in modern games that, let's face it, even people who only play modern games get irritated with, like being bamboozled, taken for a ride, and no, not that kind of being taken for a ride. But then there are folks who simply find a lot of the more modern, open-ended, exploration-heavy gameplay conventions to be a load of time-wasting boondoggle. But whether it be the bamboozling or boondoggling, many retro gamers have come up with an idea for how to approach newer games. And that idea is, how about I just don't? Especially with the decades worth of older games that are out there already. But I'm here to tell you, if you're a fan of older games, there are some modern games you may still enjoy, and specifically because a lot of them are meant to appeal to us retro gamers. And a lot of them just so happen to be on the Nintendo Switch. And even if they're not exclusive to the Switch, that seems to be the console a lot of people prefer to play them on. A console where the hardware itself has some things going for it that retro gamers tend to like, such as cartridges. Now, granted, they're a little bit smaller than they used to be, so if you want to get a good old cartridge staring session in, you'll need to get a little bit closer, but where there's a will, there's a way. With that said, for my first game, I'd like to talk about Mega Man 11, a game series that has seen a lot of releases over the years, especially if you include some of the spin-offs like the Zero series and X series. And yet, it still wasn't enough releases for many folks who were banging down the doors for another release in the series, which looked like it wasn't going to happen for a while until a hero emerged, Mighty Number 9, a direct response to Capcom for not putting out another Mega Man game, which had people laughing at Capcom for having it stuck right to them. Then after waiting 57 years for that game to actually come out, and for a game that wasn't very good, people were laughing at themselves for having it stuck right to them. Then Capcom was like, well, I guess we could just make an actual good Mega Man game now, and as an added benefit, it'll actually be Mega Man and not whoever this is. And we got Mega Man 11. By most accounts, a very good game. With a series like this, you'll always have some people who don't like it for this reason or that reason, but as somebody who has played a lot of the Mega Man games, I like it myself, and I'm certainly not alone. Basically, it has all the key things you'd want out of a Mega Man game. Fun and creative stages with a boss that goes along with the theme at the end of the stage that of course has a really cool power you then obtain from the boss. The ability to choose stages in the order you want and figure out which weapons work well against which enemies and bosses, always a treat. Personally, I find the brick dropper to be really useful. The biggest difference in this game, I would say, is how long the stages themselves are. They're longer than stages in the series have traditionally been. I mean, not to sound dramatic or nothing, but while I was playing, I let out a boy, this is long. But perhaps more than that would be the ability you have to slow down time or power up your weapon for a limited time. You have a meter that needs to recharge in order to use it more, so you'll find yourself keeping an eye on that meter a lot and strategically making sure it's powered up for certain sections. This is one of those games where playing it to capture footage made me want to just keep playing it afterwards. And my neglected household to-do list can tell you that I did. Next game that I want to talk about is actually a more recent game that I've picked up, which would be Steel Assault. This game is awesome. What a fantastic side-scrolling action game. You'll be able to immediately jump right in, start playing, and have a blast with this one. Wait a minute, that reminds me of something. Oh yeah, retro games, and we like those. While some might immediately be reminded of games from the 16-bit era, This game specifically makes me think of a Game Boy Advance game. Some of you GBA fans might know exactly what I'm talking about. It's that bright, almost neon-like color palette. A color palette that the Game Boy Advance used in order to make the original model that didn't have a backlight easier to see. Well, you can see this game and it's looking really nice. The pixel art, the animation, the teenage version of yourself that this game reminds you of being, it's all here. The game's mechanics, as I mentioned before, are pretty straightforward. You've got a button that can jump and slide. You've got a button to attack with your electric whip. Yes, I said electric whip, and you'd better believe it. As well as this zip line type thing. This is where a lot of the creativity comes into play. Much like your grapple hook in Bionic Commando, the zip line is where a lot of the skill development comes into play. But unlike Bionic Commando, you can still, of course, jump. How about that? Capcom said, let's have a game where you can't jump. And then every game since said, let's never do that again. The only downside of Steel Assault is that it's a little on the short side, but is that really such a bad thing? You still haven't even finished Okami. Having some shorter games in your library ain't so bad. Next game I want to talk about is Shredder's Revenge. That's right, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This game pretty much has to be suggested because if there was ever a game made specifically for retro gamers, this is it. And you know, this is also a good reminder that if we make it known we're interested in certain things, there's a good chance we'll get it at some point. Maybe. But this game, the pixel art, the attention to detail, all the little homages, and oh yeah, a really fun game that absolutely rocks when played by yourself, but even more so when played with friends, and we're talking up to 6 players if you want to. Now, before I say anything else nice, I just need to get this one thing out of the way that I really hate, which, to be fair, can just be ignored, but why did they put a taunt in the game that charges up your super move? This completely makes the game broken unless you ignore it. Have I mentioned I think you should ignore it? Otherwise, you can just ignore getting good at the game and spam this method instead, which most adults can just agree to not use, but try getting your friend's kid who's all jacked up on sugar and cheese to resist. And even if you are with adults, you know how it is with your friends. They can be turds. Say you take a bathroom break, goodness knows what they're doing while waiting for you. They could just be spamming that taunt button. I've done worse. One time while my buddy was in the bathroom, I went snooping around his kitchen for bread bag clips and steal me one. Steal me one. Guess who got another long white for his collection? The game has an awesome amount of stages. Sometimes I almost wonder if this game is too long. With the older games, it was at least somewhat realistic to beat the entire game in one sitting. But with how many stages there are here, who am I kidding? It's fun enough that you could easily play through the entire thing with some friends if you've got the time. Plus, it can save your progress and you can choose which stage you want to play anyways. Alright, but that leads to my next game, which is a bit of a departure, and that would be a shoot 'em up called Mushihime-sama, or for fans of making words shorter, Mushi. Now, sometimes people will say to me, how come these games are so Japanese? And I say, because they're made by Japanese people. This game is a good opportunity to highlight the fact that there are a lot of shoot 'em ups, a genre heavily associated with retro gaming, on the Switch. But I'm focusing on Mushi for this one because it's considered one of the best shoot 'em ups ever made, at least according to more hardcore fans of the genre, but it's got plenty of appeal for more casual players as well. And casual players matter too. We got busy lives. We do stuff like clean mirrors. Well, maybe I don't. But if you're playing these games on Switch, and especially in handheld mode, it's probably going to be under more casual circumstances anyways. Actually, for what it's worth though, I have done a 1 credit clear for a couple of these games. And you know what? I forgot to put that on this year's holiday cards I send to my extended family. Maybe I can just send out a group text. Typically, an analog stick isn't what you want to use for these types of games, but I will say that because the dead zone is so small on the small Switch analog sticks, it's actually not as bad as you'd think. Oh, and by the way, did you notice my left thumb going kinda squirrely? It's the darndest thing, but I find myself getting nervous while playing these types of games on film. Isn't that something? I do find it kind of fun that you can hook up an arcade stick to this if you want to. Alright, and for the final game that I'll be mentioning, we have Hollow Knight. I've seen some people say this is their favorite game they've ever played. I'll just go on ahead and assume there's some games they've never played. It's certainly an easy recommendation for fans of the exploration-based side-scrollers. What I like about it is that it really tries to go for its own unique aesthetic. The theme and overall story is unlike anything else, and much like Symphony of the Night, it's about as atmospheric as a side-scroller can be, helped in large part due to the game's fantastic soundtrack, but also due to the game's art style, color palette, and lighting. And I just gotta say it, the bosses in this game are super fun. In fact, that's basically what drives me through this game. I am all about trying to find the next boss encounter. The game doesn't skirt on difficulty either. You have really got to come into each enemy encounter ready. Well, except for maybe some of the little grunts. But that does it for the games that I wanted to mention. Hopefully at least some of these piqued your interest, or were games you were already big on and just wanted to hear me say some nice things about. Like the part 1 I did of this video, all of these games do have physical releases, but unfortunately some of them had limited prints, which, everybody sing the chorus with me, sucks. But speaking of part 1, if you are indeed interested in that video, I'll have a link in a pinned comment down below for those who haven't seen it. And of course, I'd be curious to hear any other games you might have to suggest, although good chance people will recommend games that are already in part 1 or that might appear in a potential part 3. Oh, and just for fun, who here has finished Okami? So with that, leave your comment down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games. He's